Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today I decided that because of the fall fiscal policy updates, I decided that we take an opportunity to look through them and fact check what Bill Morneau ended up saying. So I've ended up clipping the main parts of his speech that he gave in the House of Commons just a few days ago, and we're going to look through it and we'll see what is accurate, what is inaccurate. As you can imagine, a lot of it was wrong. And then I also clipped some of the conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre. I ended up clipping some of his response to the Bill Morneau's speech. So we're going to take a quick look through that, and everything should go well. But if you're having any problems, like audio wise or anything, let me know in the chat, and then I will fix any of that as we go along. All right, and without much further ado, let's get into it. 1 second, we'll just have to bring that up. All right, here we go.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 83-1, I wish to table a notice of Ways and Means motion to amend the Income Tax Act, the Income Tax Act regulations, and explanatory notes. I ask that an order of the day be designated for consideration of the motion. Canadians made a choice. They chose to turn their back on the failed policies, the failed austerity policies of the past. Policies that produced stubborn unemployment and the worst decade of growth since the Great Depression.
So he brings that up about how it created the worst loss of jobs, worst economic problems since the Great Depression. That's because the 2007-2008 financial crash literally was one of the most devastating financial crises that the world has ever faced. There's a few other ones that were up there. I mean, obviously you have the stock market crash of 1929. That was one of the top ones. You also had the financial crash of 1972, I believe it was. But when he brings that up and he's trying to throw that as a jab back at the Harper government, that was because they literally was one of the worst financial crashes that the world had ever seen. And they actually handled it pretty damn well, because Canada weathered the storm a lot better than a lot of other countries, even better than America ever did. And that was because at the time we had Jim Flaherty as the finance minister, and Jim Flaherty was probably one of the best finance ministers that Canada has seen. I mean, when he died, he received standing ovations on both sides of the aisle, whether you're conservative, liberal, NDP. Everyone more or less acknowledged how good he did during the financial crash. So this led to some of the problems that we ended up seeing. That's one of the main things that he brought up. And then we can see what the unemployment rate was over that time, how back in 2008, 2009, how it skyrocketed, and it started to continue in a downward trend over the years. And it does seem like it got a little steeper, unemployment rate got a little steeper drop than when the Trudeau government came into office. But this was ongoing, and this was sort of part of the Harper stimulus package that ended up coming on. But all in all, it pretty much continued on a downward trend.
And in the things that matter most to them. Good, well-paying jobs. We've delivered real progress for the middle class and for people working hard to join the middle class.
Yep, so this is part is just bringing up that Canada created a lot of jobs last year, and this says back in 2016. Or sorry, they're talking about 2016, came out on January 5th, 2017, but how most of them actually ended up being part-time jobs. Now, he actually would have had a better job if he would have had an easier time if he's bringing this up, if he was talking about 2017, because 2017 there was actually a lot of jobs that were created. Many of them were full-time jobs, but 2018, that was a pretty bad year as well, and we're going to see that a little bit more. So we can see here that jobs created in 2016, and that most of them were actually happened to be part-time jobs that we ended up seeing. And then I think I have another graph in here. Yeah, and then this was for 2017. They said in 12 months to December 2017, employment was up 423,000 jobs, 2.3%, with nearly all the gains of full-time work. Over the same period, total work hours grew 3.1%, but that ended up changing come 2018. So we can see that over the time, at the beginning of January, there was a huge job loss that came right into January of 2018 of 88,000 jobs. This also ended up happening in around around August or so, maybe September, where we lost 51.6 thousand jobs. So he can't really apply this to 2018, and this is what his fiscal update had to be. It had to be with 2018. So he's actually wrong. He had a much easier time last year bringing that up than he does this time bringing it up. So this now we're seeing is graphs over time. So this one is over the last year, and we can see that it's tipping and diving. But it gets a little concerning when you start looking on a different level, when you start looking at the wider picture of everything, which I've added in. This one is over the last year. We also have 5 years, 10 years, and also the max since they started keeping track in about the 1970s. And you can see where this is starting to get concerning. So as you can start to see is that we've had this employment change. It always dips, it always goes up and it dips again. But we're starting to see that when Trudeau came into office, we're having much larger dips. This is really starting to, it's going up and down at a much larger rate, which is kind of concerning. This was over the 5 years, over 10 years. So we can see that aside from we're talking about the actual 2008 financial crash, we're actually having a much larger, this is fluctuating a lot more than it ever did under Harper's. In fact, we can even see that back in around 2012, that the employment rate was higher than Justin Trudeau has ever had it at. And then when we look at the max, we can see that especially coming into 2018, there's that huge dip. There's a huge dipping and diving in the job market. So 2018 was not a good year for jobs in Canada. Neither was 2016. 2017, they have some credit there. But all in all, over the last 3 years, they haven't been doing a very good job at keeping Canadians employed.
We started by asking the wealthiest to pay a little bit more so that we could lower taxes for the middle class.
So this is an article that was showing who was in the Paradise Papers that ended up getting released last year. And in the Paradise Papers, it was starting to see how a number of people ended up having their... We started to see how a number of people had... rich people were putting their money overseas to avoid taxes. And this ended up showing... This is Stephen Bronfman, who is one of the good friend of Justin Trudeau and a Liberal Party fundraiser. We also saw how there were a couple prime ministers that were involved as well. That's going to be coming up in just 1 second. We can see, well, the Queen was on there too. Jean Chrétien was on there. Paul Martin was on there. And that's Brian Mulroney as well. He was actually conservative. But this is saying something. We're also bringing up when he's talking about the fact that he's bringing up this idea that the idea that they ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. It's showing the controversies that he's been in concerning his own wealth when it comes to him being in office. Now, the thing is he's actually been cleared in both cases, in both his scandals. He's been cleared by the ethics commissioner. But this one is actually talking about is that it was revealed that the minister, Bill Morneau, had used a loophole to avoid placing his substantial assets into a blind trust, despite leading Canadians believe he had done so. The opposition Conservatives have revealed that in November 2015, shortly after Morneau took office as Finance Minister, and while he was still in effective control of his assets, more than $10 million worth of shares were controlled by the minister were sold just days ahead of an announcement on tax reform that the Conservatives suggested may have contributed to a subsequent drop in the stock market. The timing of the move, just ahead of the market drop, resulted in Morneau netting roughly $500,000 more than he would have if he had waited. So these are some of the controversies that he's been put into. So the selling off of the shares and also not putting his funds into a blind trust. And since he didn't put his finances into a blind trust, we are told that since then he has sold off his shares of Morneau and Scheppel, but I still question that. I believe somebody is holding on to those shares for him until he gets out of office. And he himself has actually been named inside of the Paradise Papers. His company, Morneau Scheppel, had in the Bahamas and Barbados. That's where they were putting their money. So they made sure that they were avoiding the big taxes that we're going to be seeing we're just making the wealthiest pay their fair share.
These investments will remove more than 500,000 households from housing need and help cut chronic homelessness in half.
Probably the better way to do this, if they were looking to add more money to stop homelessness, would be if they stop sending so much of our money overseas. Here's a list of some of it. We can see that they gave money to Pakistan, $2 billion, Libya, $1.45 billion, Egypt, $397 million, Mexico, Russia, Haiti, Jordan, Kenya, Sudan, Nigeria, Uganda, Congo, Ethiopia, South Africa, Senegal, Mozambique, Zambia, Kazakhstan, Iraq, Tanzania, and it ended up saying that he gave away more than $5 billion on direct cash support on foreign aid and $20 billion on immigration and refugee programs. $25 billion that could be put back into Canada, but it's not going back into Canada at all. So I'm going to check something here. So maybe if they stop sending all of our money away out of Canadian soil, then we might actually see some of the problems that they want to fix, such as chronic homelessness. Maybe we'd actually start seeing that problem being solved.
That means jobs, Mr. Speaker. Good, well-paying, middle-class jobs. Jobs that you can raise a family and build a future on.
So ever since they had promised their progressive tax that was going to make the rich pay their fair share, over 80% of middle-class families face higher income taxes under the Liberals. And this was a report that ended up coming out. And while the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reduced the marginal tax rates of incomes between $46,000 and $92,000, is implemented other reforms that result in most Canadians with children and middling incomes paying more on net. The paper focuses on couples with children under the age of 18 and single parents. It finds that more than 80% of families with income between just over $77,000 and $108,000, which the author defines as the middle class, are paying more in taxes as a result of federal income tax changes, with households paying $840 more. Lower middle class families, with those households including incomes between roughly $52,000 and $77,000, are paying $382 more on average, with nearly 70% paying more. See, this is the thing about these sort of people. The people who push for these tax reforms and make the rich pay their fair share, they don't actually do it. They actually do the opposite, and it's the middle class. I remember an old joke by George Carlin where he says, the rich take all the money, pay none of the taxes. The middle class pay all the taxes, the middle class get some of the money, pay all the taxes. The poor are there just to scare the shit out of the middle class. And this is exactly what we're doing. We're seeing how people who are loyal to the Liberals and on the inside, they're putting their money, they're hiding their money in foreign banks, so they're not having to pay it. But the average person in the middle class can't do this. They really can't. So they're stuck paying all the extra taxes, and this is just proof of it. And they talked about how people how this is to help people who want to raise a family. You're not helping them raise a family. You're actually making it more difficult than it ever has been for people who want to have kids and raise a family just by doing this.
For the average Canadian worker, wages are growing faster than inflation. If current trends continue, this year will be the strongest year of wage growth in close to a decade.
Now, I don't believe for a second that this can actually be responsible. The Trudeau government can claim this much. If anything, they could make that claim to the Ontario Liberals who are in power, because they raised the minimum wage from $11.40 to $14 an hour all in 1 year. And this was in Ontario, and considering Ontario is one of the most populated provinces, I have no doubt that this is exactly where this number is coming from, rather than the fact that Trudeau's Liberals have done anything to help. This is why. But at the same time, we saw what ended up happening. Remember, as we look back at those trends about employment, we saw that the Ontario lost 88,000 jobs in January 2018, and I have no doubt it was due to this. We did see a drop come about September as well, where a lot of jobs were lost, and that was underneath the Ford government. But as I looked into that more, it seems that a lot of people were saying, a lot of political scientists, a lot of economic experts, they were saying they can't actually necessarily attribute it to Ford's policies. They say they're not exactly sure where it ended up coming from. And you can look that up yourself. You will see that that's actually the case. Yep, there it is. The national jobless rate rises to 5.9%.
Circumstances always change. In Canada's case, this has meant dealing with a new administration in the United States. This has posed, shall I say, some interesting challenges. One of the most important things we have achieved since the last fall economic statement is the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement.
This was important for the millions of Canadians whose jobs rely on North American trade, and also important for Canadian businesses who told us time and time again that the most meaningful thing we could do to ensure stability and confidence in Canada's economy would be to successfully renegotiate NAFTA. Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we did. We were able to stand our ground because we stood on those people's shoulders.
So this, what you're seeing on your screen right now, is one of the, it's Chapter 32 of the USMCA agreement that ended up getting signed, Article 3210, where it says, at least 3 months prior to commencing negotiations, a party shall inform the other parties of its intention to commence free trade agreement negotiations with a non-market country. For the purpose of this article, a non-market country is a country that is one that on the date of signature of this agreement, at least one party has determined to be a non-market economy for the purpose of its trade remedy laws, and is a country in which no party has free trade agreement. Upon request, the party shall provide as much information as possible regarding the objective for these negotiations. Then you provide them with no later than 30 days before the date. That party shall provide the other parties with an opportunity to review the full text of the agreement, followed by entry by any party into a free trade agreement with a non-market country shall allow other parties to terminate this agreement, the USMCA agreement, on a 6-month notice and replace it with a bilateral agreement. So this pretty much goes to benefit the U.S. because a lot of people have said this is to prevent Canada from doing a free trade agreement with China. And there are plenty of other problems with doing free trade with China. But here's the thing, is Canada requires U.S. trade. Mexico requires U.S. trade. U.S. does not require Canada and Mexico's trade, which means by putting this into the agreement, this gives them a leg up on how we can conduct ourselves with other countries. And this is not something to be proud of, but this is something we were forced to sign. Not to mention all the other problems that we ended up having with Chrystia Freeland. She was hated by the Trump government. And how can they when she embarrasses herself for saying this?
The European Trade Commissioner Cecilia Malmström and I call each other sisters in trade. We sign our emails hugs. We
Really?
sometimes
You actually do that?
Yes, we do.
Wow.
We sometimes send each other smiley faces in particularly difficult moments.
But, Mr. Speaker?
So that's the type of person that Chrystia Freeland is. That's just unbelievable that she was actually taking the head on negotiations and people were actually acting as if she did a good job on it. You don't really do a good job when you go to negotiate and then during the breaks you go and do a seminar on taking on the tyrant where you consider Donald Trump to be a tyrant. You may not like Donald Trump, but he ain't a tyrant. And just so I want to say, I realize that this is choppy for everyone, so anybody who's hanging in there, I appreciate it. I need to figure out how to make this better. I'll figure out something. But anyway, moving on.
Just because we share a trade agreement with the United States doesn't mean we'll always agree with their approach. The current administration has moved forward with an aggressive package of tax cuts for large corporations. That's their right as a sovereign nation. Some on the right have lobbied us to match those measures. If we were to do that, it would add tens of billions of dollars in new debt, Mr. Speaker.
I mean, come on, people.
I said, come on.
Uh-oh, retard alert. Retard alert.
Mr. Speaker, let's be blunt. Managing a federal budget calls for some tough choices. And the fact is, Mr. Speaker, when the members opposite push for an aggressive elimination of the deficit, what they really mean are aggressive cuts in services, cuts that will make life harder for people and for families.
And so we choose a different path. One that makes it clear to businesses that if they have a choice to invest on either side of the border, Canada is the smart and sensible choice.
So apparently they have confidence that we're doing well for when it comes to businesses, but we have plenty of reports that are showing that businesses are leaving Ontario. Leaving Canada in general. Now that has different things to do. I'm sure we lost a lot of business here in Ontario when the minimum wage went up to $14 an hour, and that's because it became much more difficult for people to able to afford it. But we're also adding a carbon tax on top of that. Well, how the hell are you supposed to make this work when you're constantly making it difficult for businesses to start up in Canada? Like, you're just going to force them to the US, which has lower business taxes, doesn't have a carbon tax, lower minimum wage. And there's problems when it comes to minimum wage. You raise the minimum wage, inflation is going to go up. It happens every time. I knew about this when I worked in a minimum wage job. Every time the minimum wage bumped up, our prices bumped up. It's inevitable. And then we have foreign investments leaving Canada as well. Yeah, that's right. Green companies too. For Canada being the country that is pushing for green companies to start up here, they apparently don't want anything to do with us.
Challenges all around us.
Challenges that range from uncertainty about the global economy to concerns about lingering trade disputes to the challenges facing the oil and gas sector in Alberta, which is contending today with very low crude oil prices.
Yeah, very low. Historically low, in fact. Look at that graph. That's just awful. Terrible. And this is something that we're also starting to hear, is how much money we could be losing every single year. We're losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day, billions of dollars every year. I mean, $100 billion every year. Imagine if that was going back into the economy. That would be fan-fucking-tastic. But that's not what's ending up happening. And tomorrow I'm releasing the first part of my new series, and the first part is talking about the tar sands campaign, and you'll see why we're losing so much money inside of our oil industry.
In 2016, our government worked with provinces and territories in consultation with Indigenous peoples to reach Canada's first ever National Clean Growth and Climate Action Plan. It is a comprehensive plan that invests in public transit, phases out coal power, invests in clean energy, prices pollution, and supports energy efficiency across Canada.
Mr. Speaker, Conservative politicians here in the House and in some provincial capitals want to bury their heads in the sand and ignore what's happening to the climate and to the economy. They want to make pollution free again and let our kids and our grandkids deal with the consequences.
Will you unveil a plan that will actually meet the Paris targets?
Of course I will unveil a plan that reaches the targets that we have already voted in favor of. We believe that Canada has to be part of the solution. We want to have, we will have a meaningful plan to reduce emissions, and that will also tackle other major environmental issues.
So it's not that the Conservatives don't believe in climate change, they just don't believe in your carbon tax. In fact, they voted in tandem with the Liberals when it came to the Paris Climate Agreement, something that a lot of people didn't like, a lot of Conservatives didn't like when it came to the Paris Climate Agreement. So you can't make this claim. In fact, and the thing is when we're talking about a carbon tax, is that even those who would like to see it, the best we can find is that it's a gray area, whether a carbon tax actually lowers CO2 emissions, and at best, it doesn't work, because it hasn't worked in BC. BC, they are still polluting. In fact, they've even started polluting more since they had a carbon tax put in by their provincial government. So it's just a job killer. That's all it is.
After 3 years of strong action, Canada is now poised to lead and succeed in the global clean growth economy, an opportunity that's estimated to be worth $26 trillion in the next dozen years.
I don't know where they keep getting these number on, because not too long ago, Catherine McKenna was saying it was $30 trillion opportunity, but it doesn't really work. And as this article by Spencer Fernando says, first, the Liberals actually keep the same climate targets put in place by the Conservatives, so it's odd to say Conservatives have no plan when the Liberals didn't change the targets they inherited. Second, Canadians hate the Liberal plan, with support for the carbon tax collapsing. And third, the idea of $30 trillion opportunity is absurd. Either McKenna is referring to some vague idea of a long-term global investments, so not benefiting Canada, or she is claiming that it's $30 trillion opportunity for Canada, which is simply impossible. That's almost 20 times bigger than our entire economy, and it ignores the fact that the Liberal climate action is reducing economic growth and pushing investments away. So where they're getting this $30 trillion number from, nobody knows. They've never been able to actually say where it's coming from.
We need to make a cleaner economy more affordable for middle-class Canadians. That's why our government will not keep any of the revenues from pricing pollution. We'll return every single penny to provinces and territories where we collect it, and 80% of Canadian families will be better off as a result.
I saw this come out in Halloween, and I think it sums it up best when it comes to this carbon tax. Justin Trudeau, give me all your trees now, and I'll give them back to you later. Trust me. This is very similar to what he's saying. Do you trust the government to give the money back? The government has been terrible at handling the money. And the thing is, too, is that when it came to the carbon tax, we've seen people's bills who are already suffering under this, and their prices are astronomical. There was a woman from Fort McMurray who's a small business owner who ended up showing her bill. And she ended up showing that on this bill, her carbon tax was almost as much as her delivery fee. Her delivery fee was over $700. I think it was like $790 some odd dollars, and the carbon tax was like $750 that she ended up getting charged. So you're not helping any of the small businesses, and the idea that you're going to give the money back, I don't believe that for a second. I believe that once you do collect that money, a lot of it is going towards the United Nations. That's what I believe. Especially because the UN's going broke.
To encourage businesses to invest in their own growth and create more good, well-paying jobs, our government proposes to allow businesses to immediately write off for tax purposes the full cost of machinery and equipment used in the manufacturing and processing of goods. We will also allow specified clean energy equipment to be eligible for an immediate write-off of the full cost. This will help achieve climate goals and boost Canada's global competitiveness. And in response to requests from the business community, we're also introducing a new accelerated investment incentive, an accelerated capital cost allowance for businesses of all sizes and across all sectors of the economy. This incentive will encourage more businesses to invest in assets that will drive business growth over the long term, setting the stage for more good middle-class jobs across our country. The current administration has moved forward with an aggressive package of tax cuts for large corporations. Some on the right have lobbied us to match those measures. If we were to do that, it would add tens of billions of dollars in new debt, Mr. Speaker.
So he thinks that he literally on one hand is saying that they need to help businesses in order to do well, but then on the other hand, he says that cutting taxes on these businesses would just create debt and wouldn't actually help anyone in the long run. Well, which one is it? Are you telling me that subsidies won't add to the federal deficit? And besides, this kind of contradicts to what he just said a few days before delivering the fiscal report. I have added that in.
We're in a good position. Obviously, when unemployment rates are at or near 40-year lows, that's positive. We've seen some very significant investments. Most recently, the significant investment by LNG Canada, largest single investment in Canadian history by a private investor. So Canada is a place where people want to make investments.
So nobody really knows. He just contradicts himself. Not the first time, won't be the last.
And because our economy is doing so well, we also have the fiscal room to continue to follow through on the commitments we made to all Canadians.
They have never stuck, really, to any of their important promises. Their biggest thing that they pushed so hard on was the legalization of marijuana. That was really their big goal when it came down to what promises. But as we look at some of the things that they have broken their promise on, it was things, for instance, the end the first past the post voting system and explore alternative electoral reform options. This was one big one that a lot of people ended up voting for. They wanted to have something a little more direct, a little more direct democracy there. But they ended up breaking their promise on this. But my God, they made sure that every single Liberal MP was at the table when it came to that marijuana vote. They called some MPs and senators back from vacation in order to make sure they were there for these votes. So marijuana was a big one. They didn't stop the plan to end Canada Post door-to-door mail delivery and restore mail services. Everybody's still got to go to a collective mailbox in order to do it. So all the big promises got destroyed.
Mr. Speaker, what these and the other measures contained in the Fall Economic Statement all have in common is this. They're all part of our government's plan to follow through on the commitments that we made to Canadians, to strengthen and grow the middle class and offer real help to people working hard to join it, to grow the economy and invest in the middle class, to give Canadians the help that they need to succeed, making smart investments to grow the economy for the long term, while we bring the books back towards balance.
And the budget will balance itself.
In what year will the budget be balanced?
I think this video is quite telling to everything on this. Bill Morneau versus Pierre Poilievre on when the budget will be balanced.
As we've shown each year, we've shown the ongoing trajectory to be fiscally responsible by reducing the amount of debt to our GDP over time.
In what year will the budget be balanced?
As I've said, we think it's important to be fiscally responsible and to have a balanced approach to managing our economy. And that is exactly the approach we've taken. Happily, it's working with a high level of growth, and it's showing that we can make investments in our long-term future and do it in a fiscally responsible way.
And in what year will the budget be balanced?
And as I've said, the approach that we've taken is one that has demonstrably worked.
When you have modest growth, we have modest growth this year, we will have modest growth, you don't return the country into deficit. And Trudeau's deficits will not be small. Mr. Trudeau has made tens of billions of dollars of spending promises. He said the budget will balance itself. He has no idea what he is talking about when it comes to these things. That's why you could be sure that his small deficits will become large deficits and would get Canada into the same pickle of high taxes and program cuts that we had under the last Liberal government.
I find this man tried to warn us, and I'm not even the biggest Harper fan, you know? Like, when he was in office, I can't really say I was a big fan of the guy, but I didn't appreciate at the time some of the things that he did or some of the things that he said. And this was one time where he tried to warn Canadians what was going to happen, and he called it. That's exactly what we've been promised. We were promised 9 budget deficits we were promised 3 budget deficits of $9 billion, and on the final year, they will balance the budget. That's not going to happen. In fact, this article on Maclean's from last year, a year and a half ago, says Canada isn't projected to run balanced budgets until 2050. The collapse of oil prices is one culprit. The larger problem is Canada's aging population. But there's more to that. It has to do with the type of budgets that Trudeau has been putting out. We look at what happened, what the 2018 budget was. It had next to nothing that would help. It was just gender this, gender that, racial this, racial that. In fact, one of the main things he also campaigned on, and he said since he came into office, had to do with infrastructure. We need to build up our infrastructure. Less than 1% of the budget over the next couple of years goes towards infrastructure. So, like, you need to have something better than just gender parity and we're going to give this female group and that racial group more money. That doesn't do anything to build up the economy. People were literally calling it one of the very first real socialist budgets that had been introduced into Canada.
That's what Canadians expect of us. That is what we promised. And that is, Mr. Speaker, exactly what we're doing. Thank you very much.
So I don't know whether I missed it or what, but he, like, in this video that I clipped, I didn't hear anything about the $600 million that was going towards the media. And the problem with this is the fact that they're going to give out this money, but they're also going to discuss this with a panel about where the money should go. A panel that gets decided by the government. Not that every single media organizations or the big ones get their spot at the table, but they're going to decide decide who sits on this panel, and then that panel is going to say where they should send the money. So if you have people such as the CBC, the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, who are sitting there and saying where the money should go, they're obviously going to put it towards themselves. But the problem is too, and I think there's a good point that has to be made on this, is the fact that a lot of the money is going to be, a lot of this money is going to influence the way that the media reports. Not so much that they're going to give the money and say, you better report well on us, but this is the money that they're going to give. And then what happens, just as an example, if the Conservatives, when they're campaigning in the next election, say, we're going to stop that. You're not going to receive any more funds from the government. Do you think that's going to then influence the way, you think that's going to influence the way that a lot of these journalists report? You can bet your ass they are. And I mean, even when we're not talking about opinion pieces, but we see this. I mean, when the CBC was talking about this on the National, they had Rosie Barton, I think her name was. Rosie Barton, I think is on the CBC. She on the National, and she ended up, one of the first things she said when this came out was saying that they're promising to do this, more deficits. So do deficits even matter? I don't think so. She's not even an opinion piece, but this is the way she presents it. This is also a woman who criticized Harper for all the deficits, the budget deficits that he ran, but now apparently budget deficits don't matter anymore. You can bet your ass they were, and a lot of people brought up a good point. Do you think Ezra Levant and the rebel media are going to get this money? No, they're not. No way they ever would. We should be doing this on more of on the free market economy, which is that if you don't end up being able to afford to stay open in business, then you don't get a bailout. But this is exactly what they're going to do towards the government. And I actually ended up clipping something from Frank Vaughan, which I think comes up after this, where he talks about this problem. Here's Post Media. This is over the last couple years, last 4 years or so, the way their stock prices have gone. It's just plummeted. And it's the same thing with the Toronto Star. The Toronto Star is just plummeted. So no wonder these organizations are getting a bailout. They can't hold a readership because nobody wants to hear from them anymore. Yeah, here we go. Frank Vaughan.
In terms of fundraising, the federal government will allow non-profit journalist organizations that produce a wide variety of news and information of interest to Canadians to get charitable status and issue official receipts to donors. This is also a dangerous precedent. So we're going to make, as I've said above, we're going to pick which organizations qualify. We're going to pick media and ideological winners and losers, and we're also going to allow them to become nonprofits and obtain charitable status. So you're going to have the organs of the state be registered as charities, exempting them from many of our tax laws for businesses to be able to more freely push the ideological narrative of choice that their own so-called independent panel decides is appropriate. For instance, in my community, there's two people that I know of who cover local news and publish it online, and they have a very small following. But they do it out of the kindness of their heart. They sacrifice all their time because all the local papers have already been closed down. How did this happen? First, the local newspapers were swallowed up by the conglomerates, whether it's Post Media or anybody else. They were all bought up, then they were downsized or amalgamated, and then they were eliminated entirely. There used to be 4 or 5 print editions in my area. Now there is one, and it is owned by a conglomerate. So the conglomerate media companies themselves are responsible for the dwindling journalism that happens at a local level. And here they are saying it's a serious threat to our democracy. And how do they propose to deal with it? By the taxpayer giving them a pile of money to enrich their mega corporations.
So I think that's quite important. And my guess is that when he talks about how his local papers are the only local paper now is owned by a conglomerate, I'm going to guess that's Post Media, because they kind of went on a binge over a few years ago where they were buying up a bunch of local papers. So that's my guess, that it's owned by Post Media. But the thing is they got the conglomerates, as he states, all these big corporations, these news medias, got themselves into this problem, and then now they want to bail out from the government. Rather than having the free market decide, have people actually have multiple different papers, and then having them buy the papers that they want, the news that they want. People don't want to go to Post Media. People don't want to go to CBC. They don't want to go to the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail anymore. They're just tired of it these days. I don't enjoy really going through. I don't like having a narrative shoved down my throat. Just put the facts out. Just put the facts out. I don't consider myself a news organization. I'm an opinion. That's literally in my name. I'm an opinion piece. So it doesn't really matter over here. But if you're going to be the news, it's supposed to be that the news presents you all the facts and has a neutral stance. But this isn't the case anymore. So here's the rebuttal from Pierre Poilievre. And actually, for this one, I'm more or less just going to shut up. There's just one point I'm going to quickly jump in just to correct something he says. But other than that, I'm done talking.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister has demonstrated that he can do two things at one time. He can give a speech while adding almost $1 million to our national debt in the same half hour. Congratulations, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, and we know that Canadians will get the bill for that new debt. Now, our government has told us, under the leadership of this Prime Minister, that budgets balance themselves. He predicted that this self-balancing budget would manifest in the year 2019, barely a month from today. Today, the Finance Minister has presented a fiscal update in which the deficit is 3 times the size the Liberal Party promised in the last election, and in which the deficit will not only be in place next year when it was promised to be gone, it will actually be bigger than it is right now. In fact,